Israel performs ancient rituals to prepare for the third temple and the coming of the Messiah. Israel believes this year is a special year, a year when the Messiah can come, not necessarily will, but can. Jews think that the Messiah can come only on a special year, 1 year out of 7, and they believe this is one of those years. So this week, on Tuesday, full dress reenactment of 2 ancient ceremonies took place: the ancient water libation ceremony and the Hakel ceremony, just as they were performed in the temple back in ancient Jerusalem. And these ceremonies were held in Jerusalem as part of a preparation for the third temple and the coming of the Messiah. The water libation is a ceremony which is recorded in the Gospel of John, where Jesus made a very famous statement, which we're going to discuss in a moment. So we have a lot to talk about today in this video. Why the Jews and this ministry think the Messiah returns on a special year as designated by the 70th week of Daniel, and whether this is that year. What Jesus' relationship to this year and the ceremony is, etc. But first, a shout out to Stephen Welk, a member of our community, who brought this all to our attention. Now let's start with a video of the ceremony. There was a parade with hundreds of participants led by priests accompanied by the Levites playing musical instruments. The parade began near the Dung Gate in Jerusalem's Old City as the Levites led the ceremony with drums, violin, guitar, clarinet, and 4-foot-long silver trumpets. They wound down into the valley below the Temple Mount to the biblical pool of Siloam. You probably have heard that. That's also in the Gospel of John, which of course was used in temple times. Back then, the ceremony would take 15 hours, with accompanying celebrations lasting all night until the temple services began the next morning. Nations came from around the world to take part in this Sukkot celebration, making it an international worship of God at the time. Water and wine were poured out together at the morning services for the last 6 days of the week-long Feast of Tabernacles or Sukkot celebration. Priests reenacted this pouring out of wine and water just this week. Now the ceremony you're watching is pointing to the coming third temple, to get those in Israel excited about rebuilding that temple. Someday this ceremony will take place there. As we said, the ceremony takes place during the Feast of Tabernacles or Sukkot. And although the water libation ceremony is part of the Jews' oral tradition passed down from Moses, it's not actually found in the Old Testament. However, Jesus participated in it, and it is likely found in the Gospel of John. As I read it, remember, the festival spoken of is the Feast of Tabernacles, and it's almost assuredly during the water libation ceremony that this takes place. On the last and greatest day of the festival, Jesus stood and said in a loud voice, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as Scriptures has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them." And by this, he meant the Spirit, whom those who believed him were later to receive. Up to that time, the Spirit had not been given, since Jesus had not yet been glorified. On hearing his words, some of the people said, "Surely this man is the prophet." Others said, "He is the Messiah." John 7:37-41. So you can imagine this joyous festival with musical instruments and all the priests pouring out water on the altar. And then Jesus shouts out from the crowd that rivers of living water will flow out of those who believe in him. Notice, the people hearing Jesus say this immediately connect this statement with Jesus being the Messiah. The next day, the religious leaders brought the woman caught in the act of adultery to Jesus to try to trick him, where he famously said, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." And later that same day, he healed the man born blind. All of this was happening during the Feast of Tabernacles and on the 8th day, the day after the feast. On this 8th day, Jesus spit on the ground, made mud, put it on the blind man's eyes, and told him to wash. Wait for it. In the pool of Siloam, yes. Another connection to the feasts and the water libation ceremony. The Pool of Siloam has a connection to the Third Temple as well. The Pool of Siloam was the starting point for pilgrims who made the annual pilgrimage to Jerusalem for the biblical feasts. They would use the pool to wash and ritually purify themselves before ascending by foot to the Temple Mount to bring their sacrificial offerings. The Third Temple is rebuilt. This is going to happen again. The pool is located outside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem to the southeast. The pool is fed by the Gihon Spring through the Siloam Tunnel, which is now known as Hezekiah's Tunnel, sometimes referred to in the Bible as the Lower Pool. The pool was built during the reign of Hezekiah, as we said, and was only discovered in 2004 excavations. So, when Jesus told the man born blind to wash in the pool, it was as a prelude of him going up to the temple. Then, the second ceremony, the once in 7 year Hakel ceremony, took place, the reading of the Torah by the king when a new 7-year cycle would begin. This command is found in Deuteronomy 31, and it involves assembling all men, women, and children in Israel of both Jewish and non-Jewish descent to hear the reading of the Torah. This happens in the year following the Shemitah year. In temple times, a large wooden stage would be erected near the temple courtyard where the king would read the designated sections of the Torah. This is the special year that Jews believe will someday mark the arrival of the Messiah, the year after the Shemitah year. The Babylonian Talmud, in the Tractate of Sanhedrin 97a, quotes a verse from Amos 9:11. Quote, "As it is written in that day, I will raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen. Our rabbis taught that in this 7-year cycle, at the end of which the son of David will come in the first year, this verse will be fulfilled." Jews believe that on Rosh Hashanah, 2 weeks ago, the Shemitah or sabbatical year ended. Now, in this previous video, this ministry discussed why we believe that the Shemitah is this year, not last year, and that next year is the year after a Shemitah. There is a link to that video down in the description. I highly recommend you watch it. But why do Jews believe the year after the Shemitah, the first year of any new 7-year cycle, would be a year that the Messiah has to return? Well, it has to do with Daniel's prophecy of the 70 weeks. These, quote, weeks are 7-year cycles of years. There has been debate about whether these years were to start on the first month or the 7th month. You would think the first month. But based on what you see Jews doing today, it should be obvious they start with the civil year, which starts on the 7th month or the month of Tishri. That's what they're doing right now, after all. And the book of Jubilees, from back before the 1st century, confirms that this is what they did back in ancient times, in the times of Jesus as well. Now, other than the Talmud, how do we know Jews were expecting the Messiah at the beginning of a cycle, after the end of a 7-year cycle? In the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is a scroll known as the Melchizedek Pesher, which describes how ancient Hebrews understood the prophecy of Daniel's 70 weeks. The document is known as 11Q13, and it is a fragmentary remnant of the whole document and was found in Cave 11 in the Qumran area. It's an explanation of why the Jews in 200 BC thought their Messiah would return on a Jubilee year. Now, Jubilee years are the first year of a 49-year cycle, not just any old 7-year cycle. 7 of the 7-year cycles combined make this Jubilee cycle of 49 years. Daniel's 70 weeks is actually 10 Jubilee cycles. 10 times 7 equals 70. And Daniel and all ancient Jews intuitively understood this. Here's what the Pesher says in part. "In this year of Jubilee, each of you shall return to his property." Leviticus 25:13. "And likewise, This is the manner of release. Every creditor shall release that which he has lent to his neighbor. He shall not exact it of his neighbor and his brother. For God's release has been proclaimed, Deuteronomy 15:2. And it will be proclaimed at the end of days concerning the captives, as he said to proclaim liberty to the captives. And that comes from Isaiah 61:1. In essence, the 70 weeks are 10 Jubilee cycles. The year after the 70 weeks, then, is a Jubilee. It's going to start a new cycle, an 11th Jubilee cycle. Thus, we should understand as well that Jesus is coming back on a Jubilee after the 70th week of Daniel. The Pesher continues, and the Day of Atonement is the end of the 10th Jubilee. There it is, right there, when all the sons of light and the men of the lot of Melchizedek will be atoned for, and a statute concerns them to provide them with rewards. This is an ancient description of the return of Jesus. Now, the last year of every 7-year cycle is the Shemitah year, and the Jubilee is the year after a cycle of 49 years. So all Jubilee years come a year after a Shemitah year. We believe on this channel that we have just entered a Shemitah year. Here's what Israel 365 News says about this. It is not surprising that every year following the Shemitah year has been significant in our possession of the land of Israel. For instance, it was a Shemitah year in 1966, and the following year, during the Six-Day War, we recaptured Jerusalem and Gush Etzion. The next Shemitah year was 1973. This year was followed by the devastating Yom Kippur War. Following the Shemitah year in 1980, we relinquished Sinai to Egypt. After 2 cycles of Shemitah, in 1995, the Oslo Agreement was made, which brought bouts of terrorism in its wake. And of course, we look at these years as Shemitah years, not the year after, in this ministry. But either way, there's definitely a pattern. So if Jesus is to return on a Jubilee year, can we predict what day the tribulation is going to start? And the answer is yes, we can. Click right here to keep watching and find out the exact day of that tribulation. Click right here to keep watching and find out the exact day that the tribulation must start according to the Bible. Till then, this is Nelson, and I will see you there.